Hello, and thank you for purchasing Bachmann Spectrum 45-ton diesel locomotive. We're sure that it will bring you years of operating pleasure. Most rail fans know that diesel-electric locomotives had a tremendous impact on everyday mainline railroading when they achieved widespread usage in the mid-1940s. Diesels literally changed the face and economics of the long-haul railroad industry in the United States. What many people don't realize is that smaller gas mechanical and diesel-electric locomotives were making their presence felt on industrial, short line, and logging railroads starting in the late teens and early 1920s, 2 decades before their big brothers took over on the main lines of the United States. The earliest internal combustion powered locomotives were small gas mechanicals that ranged in size from 2 to 25 tons. They were used in mines, quarries, granaries, lumbering, and all sorts of manufacturing plants in both standard and narrow gauge. In some cases, the locomotives were little more than an early truck or tractor chassis with railroad wheels in place of tires. Regardless of their appearance, these early locomotives soon proved their worth, as they were less expensive to maintain and operate than their steam locomotive counterparts. To a narrow gauge or standard gauge railroad, they represented a considerable savings in operating costs. To an owner-operated industrial railroad, they meant more profit on the bottom line. The Baldwin Locomotive Works began production of gas dinkies in 1910. They weighed just 7.5 tons and were characterized by a jackshaft-driven eccentric crank and side rod final drive and a hood-mounted gravity feed gas tank. Baldwin built hundreds of these locomotives for the U.S. military in World War I, and most were exported to Europe to aid in supplying the thousands of miles of trenches that crisscrossed the battlefields there. Baldwin was not the only traditional steam locomotive manufacturer to recognize the potential advantages of internal combustion motive power. Other builders of small steam engines, such as Porter, Davenport, Lima Locomotive, Heisler, and Vulcan, soon jumped on the bandwagon with gas mechanicals of their own design. They, in turn, were joined by a host of other non-steam builders, such as Plymouth, Atlas, Euclid, Whitcomb, Brookville, Mack Truck, McFarland Eggers, Holt Manufacturing, Midwest, Westminster Iron Works, and Milwaukee. As more and more manufacturers entered the fray, the technology continued to progress so that by the late 1920s, one could choose from gas or kerosene mechanical, diesel mechanical, gas electric, diesel electric, or all electric motive power. Late in the 1930s, General Electric also entered the diesel-electric locomotive market with its own line of small motive power. To date, GE's production of industrial-style locomotives has totaled over 5,700 units. As the U.S. railroad scene continued to evolve throughout the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, so did the offerings from the industrial diesel locomotive manufacturers. However, increasing competition from trucks operating on a continually improving road system put the squeeze on all railroads to operate more efficiently and profitably. The increased efficiency of industrial diesel locomotives over steam locomotives allowed some marginal lines to continue operating for a time, but eventually more and more short lines, industrial railroads, and logging lines fell to the rubber-tired competition. As railroad mileage began to plummet, so did locomotive sales. The result was the closing of many of the smaller manufacturers. Others merged and pooled resources in a vain effort to survive. In the end, only a handful were left. Among the survivors stood a giant, General Electric. Although some specialized applications, such as mining, restricted the size of industrial motive power to cabless four-wheel designs, the general trend was towards larger locomotives for industrial and short-line railroading, with some center cab and end cab models reaching 144 tons and upward. Today, it's common for older, obsolete mainline road switchers to continue to soldier on by joining the ranks of motive power, serving steel mills, granaries, glass plants, quarries, and dozens of other industries. Look around and you will find 40- and 50-year-old locomotives still serving in industrial applications. Bachmann's new Spectrum large-scale diesel-electric locomotive is a model of a late-design GE 45-ton center cab produced from 1958 right up to the present. And here to tell us more about it is Bill Sinclair, former manager of switching and mining locomotive sales for General Electric Transportation Systems. Bill?
Steve, it's a real pleasure to be here today to talk about the GE 45-ton switching locomotive. GE first introduced the 45-ton model in 1939 and is still producing it today. Over the years, the GE 45-ton model has undergone several alterations in body, style, and equipment. However, its most common feature hasn't changed. That being, each truck is equipped with a single traction motor on one axle with power transmitted to the other axle by side rods with counterweights. Some models after a chain drive instead of the side rods. Since its inception, GE has offered the 45-ton model in a variety of track gauges, ranging from 30 inches to 66 inches. These locomotives have been used around the globe.
And now, Bill Sinclair will take us for a cab ride in a GE 45-ton diesel-electric locomotive.
Headlight on bright, so they can tell we're coming that way. Reverser forward. Off the air brakes. Away we go. Industrial locomotives range from 25 to 144 tons. 25, of course, being the smallest one, was a two-axle locomotive, single motor. The second axle was chain drive, as was the 35-ton. And those were used in tight industrial applications, so where you had tight curvatures, usually in-factory type operations, in-plant type operations, but they could be used at times for switching. Had a tendency to rock and bob, but still it was a real good little power plant. When you got into heavier hauls to where you needed more power, more tractive effort, that's when you went to the swivel trucks and the two traction motors. And then the second traction motor, as we stated earlier, is either driven by a chain or by the side rod. After the 45-tonner, when you got into the 60-ton locomotives, and on up to the 144, that's where you graduated into 4 traction motors. Again, 2 diesel engines, 1 diesel engine on the front end, with the power or the flying movers for the 2 traction motors on the front, and the diesel engine, the generator on the second end, with the flying mover and power for the number 2 end. So therefore, when you look at the application of the product, you determine, what do I really need? How many cars am I going to pull? What kind of a grade? What kind of a tonnage? What's the curvature? You factored all this into the recipe to determine what model of industrial locomotive should I purchase. As far as longevity goes, you'd be amazed, since 1939, how many of these locomotives are still out there running. At the date, according to the records when I left, there were over 5,800 GE switching or industrial locomotives that have been sold or produced between Schenectady and the Erie plant. I don't know what percent is still out there operating, but I would say it's a very high percent.
Bachmann's model follows the GE Phase 4 45-ton body style. This style featured a taller, narrower hood than its predecessors. This design change resulted in higher and smaller windows in the center of the front cab wall. The Bachmann model captures this feature as well as many other details, including flush-mounted cabinet door latches, also known as knuckle busters, scale grills and steps, center opening cab windows and doors, a fully detailed cab with brake and throttle stand, instrument panel with gauges and an operator's seat, scale 33-inch metal wheels set to the proper wheelbase in accurately scaled trucks with distinctive metal side rods and separate metal springs, correctly shaped die-cast metal handrails, and all of the piping and other fittings found on the real locomotive. Our Spectrum model also has many of the features that have made Bachmann's award-winning large-scale locomotives legendary. These features include 2 heavy-duty can motors, power trucks with all-new metal gearboxes that feature one-piece axles and idler gears. Other features include directional white LED headlights, 2 smoke units, and a polarity switch so you can run your locomotive with other units that are wired to either NMRA, NEM standards, or large-scale practices. All wheels are gear-driven, and all wheels are used for electrical pickup. And in another first for large-scale model railroading, Bachmann has designed a body-mounted coupler that can be adjusted to either scale or high rail height. And your Spectrum 45-ton diesel is equipped for use with all heavy-duty DCC systems. Your new Bachmann Spectrum 45-ton diesel is a precision-made, full-scale model that will give you a lifetime of operating pleasure if it is lubricated and maintained on a regular basis. You should set up and follow a schedule of regular maintenance and lubrication for your 45-tonner based on the amount of usage you give it. Just like an automobile, you shouldn't run your locomotive without oil. Failure to use adequate lubrication could result in a mechanical failure. So please watch and listen carefully as we explain just how easy it is to oil and maintain your locomotive. Bachmann has designed the Spectrum 45-ton diesel to be easily maintained and lubricated. First, let's get all of the items you will need to perform the lubrication. You will need a large, level work surface to work on. You can use a thick towel or the top foam insert from the 45-tonner's packaging to act as a cushion for the locomotive. You will also need a toothpick or thin wooden dowel as well as all of the required lubricants. We recommend the Bachmann line of Easy Lube space-age lubricants. With your towel or foam insert on the work surface, turn the locomotive on its side, or if using the foam insert, upside down. We will be lubricating the power trucks, including the motor shaft bearings, the worm gear, and the internal and external axle bearings, as well as the bearing points on the truck side frame, side rods, and counterweights. We will also be applying conductive lubricant to the driving wheel treads. It is important to know before you start that over-lubrication is just as bad as no lubrication at all. So easy does it. A little goes a long way. Let's begin. Notice the rubber plugs on the power truck cover plate. These are easy access lubrication plugs. To remove the plug, grasp it between your thumb and finger and pull. To replace it, simply push the plug back in. To start, let's remove the plugs. Do not remove any other parts. This is adequate to perform all lubrication. Take your Bachmann Easy Lube heavy-duty gear oil and place 1 or 2 drops on the bearing where the motor shaft passes through the metal motor support housing on each side of the motor. This is just behind the rear of each worm gear. Put 1 drop of oil on each of the worm gears also. Next, put a drop of oil on each side of the bearing where the drive axle passes through the power truck sidewall. Now lubricate the drive axle where it passes through the truck side frame. Be sure to do this on both sides of the truck side frame. Finally, lubricate each of the bearing surfaces for the connecting side rod crank pins and outside wheel counterweights. Remember, all of the 45-tonner's parts and lubrication points can be seen in the exploded view diagrams included in the instruction manual. For the next segment, we will be using Bachmann's Easy Lube heavy-duty gear grease. This space-age lubricant won't sling off or dissipate at high running temperatures. The best method to apply this material is by using a thin wooden applicator like this. If you don't have one available, then a toothpick or coffee stirrer will suffice. Place a liberal amount of grease on the worm gears, working it well onto the entire part. When you run your 45-ton diesel, the grease will be distributed around and into the idler gears. Be careful not to overload or overpack the grease. You want to make sure that it is evenly coated all the way around on the gears. This lubrication is adequate for 20 hours of operation. Don't forget to lubricate both ends of each power truck and to replace the easy access lubrication plugs. Double check that you have lubricated all of the required parts. Now we are ready to apply the conductive lubricant. Bachmann Easy Lube conductive contact lubricant enhances electrical conductivity and will decrease the amp draw of your locomotive. The lubricant is highly concentrated. Just put 1 drop on the wheel tread. As a side note, you should perform this electrical conductive maintenance every 5 to 6 hours of operation or as needed. When operating outdoors under high temperatures and other environmental conditions, there is a lot of friction, wear, and evaporation. Friction is metal's worst enemy. Remember, you don't run your car without oil, so don't run your 45-ton diesel without adequate lubrication. Well, that's all there is to it. Your new 45-tonner is now ready to run. We recommend that you break in your new locomotive at moderate speeds with modest loads. Also, don't forget to fill out your warranty card and send it to Bachmann right away. Thank you for purchasing our new 45-ton center cab diesel. And please check out the rest of our award-winning large-scale locomotives at your local hobby retailer.
Don't stop the tape yet. Let it play and see more locomotive pictures and some neat tidbits of information from Bill Sinclair.
like building them? Fundamentally simple. Few moving parts. You got a platform. You put on a little Cummins or Caterpillar engine, whatever you chose at that time. Hooked to a simple generator. It was cabled. Each engine to each end of the locomotive was a separate power plant, going up to a common control system. And on a common control system, you had a reverser handle that would set your direction. You had a throttle handle, which would control the engine speed. And then you had your air brake system. Your air brake system consisted of the independent handle for just the locomotive itself for moving around, or in the case of what we're doing today with a bundle car and a caboose, you had the automatic air brake handle that would apply and release the brakes to those particular cars. The locomotive itself had features on like the windshield wipers for each end, the bell, sanders that would give you some sand between the wheel and the rail for additional adhesion or tractive effort. Of course, you had the air whistle, and basically that was it. Control-wise, you had a simplified start station, one switch controlled each engine, and then you had the vital functions that you had to watch when operating the locomotive. Oil pressure and water temperature for each engine, battery charging volts to make sure that you kept your battery boosted up so you could run your heater in the winter, your gauge lights, your headlights, and the control circuitry, the separate excitation system. There was also on here air brake gauges that would tell you what your main reservoir pressure was at and what your operating brake cylinder temperature was at and your equalizing reservoir pressure. The critical things that you had to watch when you towed a heavy load was the amperage that you put to each traction motor. Because it was a self-pull, self-ventilated motor, you had to make sure that if you got into a heavy pull, high current situation, you were never in that red zone, as the plate indicates, over 4 minutes at a time. You keep your motors from cooking or burning out. The unique thing about this locomotive is there's an indicator plate here that says do not operate over 20 miles per hour, but you cannot find a speedometer on this locomotive. And that was due to the fact is that they didn't make speedometers at the time electrically that would send a signal up here. The only kind of speedometer you could get was a cable-mounted speedometer that went to one axle. But with the side rods on it, how do you hook one of those up? So, how do you know if you're not going over 20 miles an hour? A good engineman always knew his speed because he worked off the speed, time, and distance. And that prevented him from exceeding the rated speed limit, which was up to the maximum motor RPM.